Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to Europe House this evening on a sunny Friday evening. I think it's a testimony to everybody's interest in the topic and to the organisation of the Young European Movement for tonight's event. I won't stay very long because I know that everybody's probably keen to hear what the panel has to say. I'll hand over first to the delegation's Climate and Environment Attaché, Emily Gas, to explain a little bit about the European delegation and our association with the Young European Movement. Emily.
Thanks a lot, Tessa. So we're very happy that we are hosting this event. So whenever we host an event here, you have first 5-10 speeches from some of us here, and then you can go to the concrete stuff. We're very happy to host you here. I'm very thankful to the public diplomacy section of the delegation, to the Office of the European Parliament as well for having Terry joining us. I'm also very happy for selfish reasons in a way. It's an opportunity for me to express my respect, I would say, for the generation. Because I'm probably a bit older than you guys. Just this morning in the Times, there was an editorial, no country for young people, saying how much you're having the bad end of the stick on rents, wages, prospects in general, maybe. Now, I don't know your personal circumstances. For what I know, you're the sons and daughters of billionaires, but I acknowledge that. And also, I don't think it's been truly acknowledged what you had to go through on lockdown and COVID, maybe compared to other parts of the population. So this is what I wanted to tell you. As I told Michael earlier, so I was taught one thing when you do a little speech is very easy. It's a carry of advice for you as well. You just take a speech of Barack Obama or Michelle Obama, you copy paste, change a few things, and that's your job done. So today I will talk about the corn and maize agricultural market in Wisconsin. No, but first what I wanted to do is give you a scene setter on what we do here on climate and what we've seen happening. So it's the end of a big sequence in a way these days. We've had the Bonn intersessional, which is kind of the pre-COP27, big round of negotiations. We've had the G7 in Elma, we had the climate ministerial with Joe Biden. We had the WTO MC12, so complex negotiations on trade and how impact features there. Here in London, it's the end of the London Climate Action Week on a Sunday. Big week as well because we've had the Committee on Climate Change that has published this annual progress report 2 days ago that's been well covered by the press. And of course in the EU as well, big votes in Parliament last week, big decisions in Council on the Fit for 55 package. We hope we'll have some resolution on that, final resolution by the end of the year or early next year. Unfortunately, it's not gone all well, to be fully honest, and you must know that. The mood is a bit difficult. The Russian war of aggression on Ukraine, of course, the question of financing for climate is dampening the talks a bit. We've had a lot of I would say, testing of the commitments to removing fossil fuels from our economy. And you can see that even just today from some reactions in different parts of the German government on how exactly to interpret the G7 text. In the UK as well, it's been a little bit difficult. The CCC report I mentioned to you shows that the country is not on track to reach net zero. There are significant parts of the economy for which there is no plan. And of course, in the EU, it's also not easy. We all have the same challenge of implementation. And let's see how we do, but the times are difficult. Now, looking more at what we do here and why it's so relevant to have you here and that meeting at the intersection of youth activism, climate activism, and European activism. Our delegation here is, of course, supporting with everything Brexit and the hardcore stuff there, but we're also looking forward to the longer-term relationship. That's our key goal, is to foster a good relationship beyond the Brexit issues of the day, even if, of course, we don't miss an opportunity to explain how important the Northern Ireland protocol is to us and how that's key to unlock a lot of things. And when we look long-term, of course, one of the very first topics that comes up is climate. So to quote my ambassador, what we've been trying to do is to insulate climate from the Brexit climate, does that make sense? So to not have it polluted by the rest. It's been a bit complicated sometimes. At the end of this big sequence I mentioned to you, I've been screening the press, I've been screening what British think tanks have been saying, and the EU, Europe, and sometimes some of its member states are attacked a lot. Perhaps sometimes more than others, including major developed countries who might not do as well as we do. It is sometimes a bit unfair. I'm sure it's sometimes fair as well, some of the European positions. But it's also probably a reflection that also here, there's a lot of expectations on the EU. And when you expect a lot from someone, and maybe you criticize even more when you're not happy with this or that. So that's something we're dealing with here, and we are trying to foster the dialogue with the UK NGOs, UK government, etc. And that's why I'm very happy that you have this discussion here, and I'll be staying. So my role is also to make sure you have all left the building by 9 p.m. I'll also guide you to nice pubs outside if you want to continue there. So I'll be staying, and I look forward to your discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very warm welcome. I'm just wondering, am I amplified, or is this just the echo of the room that amplifies my voice here? It must be the echo of the room. Do you also hear that? Yeah? Okay. Well, I hope that everyone can hear me very well. Thanks everyone for coming. We're really delighted that also many of you decided to join us spontaneously in the last couple of days, and it's great to see the room so full. I want to extend, from the YEM perspective, an enormous amount of gratitude to the delegation for hosting us here tonight and for supporting us in our various endeavors, not only this project but also others, and also to the European Parliament Liaison Office, and also representative for the member on her UK tour, Terry Rankin, for having us and being such strong allies. We'll be. Is it better with the?
Yes, for the live stream.
Okay. Oh, that's a good one. That's amplified. And if we're already talking about the tech, I actually forgot my pen in the back. If I may take that.
I have a question.
You might use it yourself, though, no?
We can share.
Oh, we can share. Okay, that's going to be a fight. Well, anyway, we're going to be talking this weekend a lot about climate action, climate advocacy, climate change. Sustainability, and this weekend it should really be a weekend of learning for all of us and for connecting. That's great. And I think, as youth organization, as Young European Movement UK, what's really important for us is that we empower people, young people, our target group, everyone under 35 living in this country and feeling in some way European, because of being a fan of the EU, because of having family abroad, because of having maybe lived a period of an exchange or something like that. There's many different affiliations that you can have. Everyone is welcome to join us. We would like to empower those people. We would like to empower you, that you become climate leaders. And that's why some of you decided to sign up for the weekend or for this event tonight. And we hope that this panel here, which is a very diverse group, can share their perspectives of how they incorporate climate activism, their love for a green climate, for a healthy climate, into various perspectives of their lives. And this is why I have the pleasure of introducing the panel to you all. First and foremost, MEP Terry Rankin. Applause. I have to check. Here. Okay. Very good. Emilia has the double-sided printing enabled on his printer. That speaks for an environmental attaché. Terry is a German politician who's been serving as a member of the European Parliament for Germany since 2014, and she's the vice chair of the Greens in the European Parliament. So of the European Free Alliance.
Greens European Free Alliance.
And also, as a member of the Green Party in Germany. So thank you very much for joining us. I have to her left, Namir. I have to say on a personal note, I met Namir in a climate engagement that we were both part of at the Young G20 last year. You were the head delegate for the UK. I was the non-head delegate for the EU for the same track. And before and after that, Namir has been up to various interesting things with regards to climate. For example, his work as sustainable finance consultant at Ernst & Young, as a very active activist of the British Youth Council. If you go to the British Youth Council's website, I think your head pops up 3 or 4 times. I'm not kidding.
I was much younger then.
Maybe it.
Handsome as today. Then we have, what else? The Future Leaders Network, COP27 coordinator. So you might want to share a little bit about how this is going to work out to travel to Egypt sustainably or not, and what you do to mitigate that. That will be an interesting one. And a couple of other engagements that we will be able to talk about. And then we've got, sorry, applause. And then, last but not least, we've got Ben joining us. Ben is a film and TV executive and a charity officer and advisor, and a social impact advisor who believes that we have a special opportunity to use films and gamification to champion people's stories and engage people for our causes. So once again, a very interesting perspective on activism. Thank you for joining us, Ben. And I suppose I'd like to kick things off with a round of opening statements, first of all. But in order for you to not only listen, but also do something in this event, you see a little QR code here. And for those that have already managed to scan this, you will see that this leads you to a Slido page, which allows you to ask questions throughout the event. And maybe for those that haven't managed to scan it, if we could switch to the second slide, we have the QR code in high resolution. And scan that. That would be great. And then you have the page open and you can ask questions all along. And if everyone has managed to scan the code, if Martin or Sophie could switch over to the other laptop, and we have Alexiane coming on with her speech on Zoom. And I'll quickly, to fill the time, I'll quickly introduce Alexiane, who would have normally joined us here tonight on this panel, but unfortunately, she was working so hard on the podcast that she broke her foot. And this is how, unfortunately, she couldn't make the travel anymore. And after all, actually even her train got cancelled. So in two ways, Destiny didn't want it to happen. And she decided to join us in Zoom instead. And she is the head of the YEM UK podcast project, and therefore the head of this event. Alexiane, can you speak and we see if we can hear you?
Hello everyone, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, loud and clear, wonderful.
Perfect. So Yusuf has already introduced me and he has already spoken about my unfortunate foot wound. So it seems that I'm used to being displayed on the screen in this very same room. But instead of being online today, I'm pleased to see so many of you because I'm also following live on my phone. And I warmly thank everyone who could attend this in-person event and also our online guests. So first, let me give you a little more details as how we will proceed tonight. This kickoff event is meant to fulfill three main objectives. First, introduce you to the YEM Podcast teamwork. Second, most importantly, showcase part of our work live. And third, discuss youth activism's impact on society, as well as the specific impact of podcasts on conveying information and then staring at discussions. Our series, Let's Be Activists, is meant to shed light on 6 young activists' work in the UK. We will dive into their personal journey, their hopes, their challenges, and above all, we will hear inspiring stories to show how youth activism can contribute to shaping tomorrow's society. So who is on YEM UK podcast team? So Marion, Julius, Michael, Sam and I are part of this team. Michael and I are the hosts of this series, meaning that you will always hear one of us setting the stage at the beginning of each podcast for preparing the interview with the guest. So we introduce the guest and the interviewer. Speaking of interviewers, Sam, Marion, Michael, and I, who will be responsible for podcast, I say hi to Ben because we recorded a couple of days ago, or maybe weeks, the second podcast together on Zoom once again. Yes, it is possible. And also Sam coordinated all the recording sessions, which is, and I confirm it, a huge task, and it was brilliantly carried out. Thanks again. Julius is helping us with the promotion part of the podcast, reviewing the questions, the script, to make sure that each podcast interview is efficient and also answers to very intriguing and interesting questions. My role is then to coordinate all the podcast production, from the scripts writing to script editing to reviewing transitions to, yes, sound editing. And once again, thank you to the amazing musician who produced the jingle for us, who will soon discover the magical piece he put together for us. So here's how we'll spend the next 1 hour and a half or so together. First, we will listen to YEM UK's podcast trailer, also released on Monday, this Monday, the 27th of June. And you will always find our podcasts on Anchor and Spotify. They will always be released on Fridays evening. We have a whole weekend to listen to them. And we have 6 of them in total, as I said previously, so you will be able to discover each of the new ones every week until early August or so. Second, we will welcome 3 guests for our panel discussions, but Julius has already touched upon that. And our main big research question is, podcasts, how can they contribute to disseminate information, and how can they contribute to youth activist work? And lastly, you will have the opportunity to jump into the routine of podcast producers. Sam and Michael will give you their insights on this adventure, and we'll be happy to answer any of your questions. Without further ado, let me share my screen, and let's listen to the activist trailer. So it is first doing this and turn the screen. Here we go.
We don't have sound yet. Is that normal, Alexa?
Sorry?
We don't have sound yet.
Okay, so then that's the problem we mentioned. I have the sound on, but you don't, so
Yeah.
technical problem here?
Sharing sound.
Yeah. If you click the green button and you try and make sure that you also share the computer sound, that should make it work. Can it work?
Chromebooks, they don't allow you to do it, so
Otherwise,
find a solution. Is it working if I take off my earphones? Like this? Is it working?
And it was raining most of
Building movements that's our society. Does this resonate with you?
Have you ever wanted to shape society so bad that you could not stay at home comfortably watching the news? Or in front of your computer, or checking your social media feed?
Was it the pandemic which made you want to stand up and fight for a cause? Or have you, whether it be climate change, consequences of Brexit, or rights for the LGBTIQA+ community, been fighting for a cause close to your heart for quite some time?
Are you a youth activist on the field, or an online one? Or are you curious, eager to learn more about these people and activists?
Welcome to the Young European Movement's new podcast series, Let's Be Activists.
My name is Alexia Kirosha.
My name is Michael Anderson.
We will be your hosts for the 6th episode series. You will hear us alternatively, from podcast to podcast, taking the stage for amazing interviews. Each podcast will be composed of a guest interview led by one of the other team members, Bruce, Tom, and Niall.
Come and listen to a series of portraits of young activists in the UK.
We will tackle diverse subjects and listen to their inspiring stories. And guess what? You are always involved in them.
With this series, we'll be hearing about the interests, motivations, and the passion which drives their activist work. Every week, sponsored by Hand Actor, you will discover our guests' definition of activism and the journey they have undertaken in order to try and change society for the better.
Come listen every week, come laugh with us, or be moved by very personal stories, and let yourself be surprised and curious. See you Fridays, the first of June.
Sorry, that was my mistake, Alexan. If you mute your own microphone, you also cut the sound. So I don't know how we can cut your background noise a bit better, but I think we just have to deal with it. If you want to go back to where you muted your microphone, and we can listen to the end of it.
She's playing the
Sorry, unmute once again.
Could you, when you muted yourself, unfortunately the output of the laptop was also muted. So if you could go back to that point and play it again, then we can hear the end of the trailer.
Come listen every week, come laugh with us, or be moved by very personal stories, and let yourself be surprised and curious. See you Friday, the 1st of July, for the release of our first episode.
This is Michael and Alexia, but let's be activists.
Okay, thanks, Alexian. Unfortunately, the quality of the transmission was not ideal, but we're going to distribute the link to the trailer afterwards. And I think the language was clear at least. So a big round of applause to you and Michael for. And we are now going to change back to the other screen, if possible. And at the same time, Alexian will also be Alexian will continue to observe the slideshow. And I also have it open here on my screen. And the first question that pops up to you guys, if you go into your Slido, is how often do you listen to podcasts? And that would be quite interesting to see. And then I can see if I can display the result in the back. I see that we have 9 respondents so far. And I don't know how often today it was selected, but it was selected many times. And then Hungary, overseas, 2 times twice a week, once a month, 3 times a week, and in a window. So I think that given that we have data so often, it's probably quite a podcast avid audience, which is going to be even more interesting, given that we have. Oh, sorry. Given that we have this as a topic tonight, that's really excellent. Awesome. Thank you very much. Switch back. Yeah, and then there is one question in the Q&A, which I will address in a moment via the panel. That's actually a very interesting one. And it's about the difference between activism and politics and the boundaries between them. And I'd like to kick off with that, with Terry as an MEP, because obviously if we are activists, we have very focused interests, we have very clear agenda, we have a lot of passion and emotion in our work. And I guess it can be quite a challenge if you're an activist at heart to bring that protest, that emotion and that passion from the street, from the public sphere, let's say, into, let's say, somewhat diplomatic speeches, into legal texts, and into the parliament. Mm-hmm. So how do you bridge that gap? Mm-hmm. That would be my opener to you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot. And first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here today and that there's so many people. I think it's fantastic that you're organizing this and also talking about, obviously, the further cooperation between the EU and the UK, but also activism in general and climate activism specifically. And this is actually a question that I ask myself very often because you haven't mentioned it, but obviously I also have a past before I was a member of the European Parliament, and my past is also in activism, in youth activism, in climate activism, specifically feminist and LGBTI activism also. And I think that for me, that has never been, well, this is how I approached it since I was active in politics. It has never been a sort of exclusive decision whether you can be an activist or a politician. Because still today, I'm a member of parliament and I know that sometimes I have a different role than, people who are in activism, who are working in NGOs and civil society organizations, but I still also feel that I'm in a way an activist. I still go to demonstrations, I organize, I do political actions, and I think that there is a lot of strength and power in exactly these forms of expressing yourself politically. But obviously, as you say, at some point, there in politics and parliaments, very often there needs to be a moment when then, you have to write a text and write it down, and you have to find majorities for whatever you're proposing, and that very often then also poses the question, how far will you go in compromising? And I think that this is a constant struggle that I'm also facing, and maybe referring specifically to climate activism. I mean, first of all, I can say I've been in the European Parliament, as you said, for 8 years now, since 2014. And I must really tell you that, because I'm probably one of the oldest here in this room, that maybe 6-7 years ago, the whole discussion around climate change had kind of gone down, like we couldn't really push through majorities in the European Parliament that we wanted to. There was a lot of blocking from the Conservatives, from the Liberals. And then with Paris and, the Fridays for Future movement, the climate engagement, that shifted. And it really also changed the majorities in the European Parliament. And you could clearly see that suddenly things were possible. We could find majorities for demands, for concrete political action that we could have never found before, even with the best arguments from my brilliant colleagues on, whatever climate demand you can imagine, it wouldn't have worked. So I think that for us to make things work, we always have to keep in very close touch with climate activism and kind of take the pressure from the street to move things forward in the parliament. But, and this is a little bit the other side, sometimes we as politicians, as parliamentarians, will also have to make compromise, and maybe to refer to the package that we just adopted in the European Parliament, maybe you were following it. I mean, obviously the Fit for 55 package is not what the Greens wanted. We wanted a more ambitious climate package. We wanted to go further. We wanted to be quicker because we believe that with this package, we are actually not going to be able to meet the Paris goals. But at the same time, it is the biggest climate package that was ever proposed from the side of the Commission. We want to play a constructive role in this. And it is better to introduce these measures than not to move forward at all. And we want to be leaders in terms of, fighting climate change. So for us, we had very long, and I can tell you, very controversial debates in the group about how we are going to position ourselves. But I think that in moments like this, you can really see sometimes you have to then say yes to something, even if you think that it's not as far-reaching as you would like it to be. But at the same time, go back to the street and fight to make something else possible. And I think this is really where activism and institutionalized politics work together. And this is, I think, how we can use both of them to move forward in society.
Thanks a lot. Very powerful answer. I will pick up on one aspect with regards to representation of all versus representation of sort of a niche of society in a moment. But unless there is a pressing question from the floor, the invitation is really here to raise your hand and come into this debate. It's in some events you even have like an open chair. We didn't really have the space for that, but really imagine this chair next to me and feel free to take your role in this debate. But I would like to move over to Namir, and my opener to you, Namir, would be, since you started off as a youth activist, I don't even know in how many other places in the British Youth Council, but definitely there as well, and with all your climate activism, when you entered professional life fully, working in the sustainable finance sector, maybe you can also explain a bit more what you do in that job. How did that make you see things in a new light? Because obviously, coming from a youth organization background myself, we have certain visions of how we would like things to change. And we maybe, we have quite minority interests, let's say, and minority opinions. And it is just the fact that we are still living in a market economy. We are living in a capitalist world. Obviously, finance and where money is spent, how money is invested, is hugely impacting everything. But we also, I guess, in our current system, can't just say, okay, we are solely going to fully go green and not fund anything that is polluting in some shape or form. So again, there's this question of compromise. So I would like to understand from your perspective how entering your professional life has impacted your thoughts about this, and maybe also changed your opinion.
Oh, wow. It's a very good, maybe 4 or 5 good questions in one, but I think they're very, very, very valid ones. So I guess to start off, I very much entered the world of life trying to change the world through the British Youth Council, which is a really interesting organisation. They're the National Youth Council of the UK. And that opened me up to the idea that there are more people like that. So the only reason I began activism at all was because when I was 15 years old, I didn't have many Facebook friends, and all my classmates had loads. So I wanted to just really up that number and try to catch up with my other classmates. And that meant I would add anything that moved. Actually, that's not even true. There was like an account that was just for someone to plant cactus, and I added that Facebook account just to get the high numbers. And eventually it came to a point when, so I went to a particular school and we had like a twin school as well. And there was someone in that school that I also added. And I didn't know them, they didn't know me, but we won't talk about that. But there was one time when they posted something on their Facebook wall that was it's pretty sad. It was something wrong, like there was clearly something that she was upset by. And so I reached out and said, hey, what's up? I've seen this message. You know who I am. Hope everything's okay. And I forgot exactly what she said, but she basically said, who the heck are you? Why are you talking to me? Go away. I'm playing Mafia Wars or 844, whatever it is. Why are you speaking to me? And I was like, I'm so sorry. I'll backtrack. I won't bother you anymore. But it took a couple of weeks later when she did reach out again and said, actually, something is wrong. I do want to talk to someone who doesn't really know anything about me because it's like an objective viewpoint. And I'm very, very lucky in many, many ways. And one is to know Julius, my friend, and another is all these opportunities that I've had. And another thing I was really lucky about was I've never been exposed to what I didn't know at the time, but now do, is a mental health crisis. Something that was just fundamentally wrong. And it made me think that if one person has been through this in a small town near Birmingham, I don't know if anyone knows where Birmingham is in the UK, It's a big city, to be fair, most people should know. But just to check, I live in a small town as part of that. It's only about 30, 40,000 people. But if it's happening to one young girl there, how many people could it be affecting? And so that's why I was like, I want to do something about this, and that's how I ended up at British Youth Council and many years later here in this spot. So I just wanted to give that context because I think the first revelation for me was that there were other people trying to do what I was doing, but in much better ways. There were people that knew more about it than I did. There were people that were more passionate about things that I was passionate about. And that's a really good thing because it shows you that you're not trying to reinvent the wheel, you're just connecting with amazing other people who are trying to progress the same thing. And I think that comes on to something you mentioned, Judith, which is a really good point actually around this minority, you said minority issue. And I think that young people often get this reputation of caring about really niche specific things. But I always feel that we tend to care about the biggest things, like for some reason, whether it's the climate change issue that we're trying to solve frantically, what we're talking about now, even things like education, eventually that shapes the entire future, it shapes your entire life, the opportunities you have and so on. So I always feel like that's something that we always get put as a reputation with, but actually might not be the case. We're going back to the most important question, which is professional life and activism. So I started working 2 years ago. That's when I graduated from uni. And I work as, it's a really fancy term. It doesn't really mean what it says, but it's a sustainable finance consultant. And what that means is how do I as a person and we as a team, how do we use the world of really, really big money? And when I say big money, I mean like trillions of pounds. And sometimes when I'm working with these numbers, I look at my bank account and I'm like, I really want some of that. It must be nice. I've got £100 left for the month. And I use that world to try and make the world more sustainable. And that can be all kinds of things. It really, really does vary. But one example is, like a clothing company, for example, let's say ASOS. ASOS has really, really bad, I don't know if I can name specific places on this session. I'll make it easier. It's a clothing company, unnamed, might allegedly have modern slavery in their supply chain. It's really bad. And if I turn around and say, I'm not going to shop with them anymore, they'll be like, oh, we've lost them here, we've lost a few people, but we'll survive. But what my job would do was I would be getting involved with the banks and asset managers and all the places that have lots of money who invest in that company. And we help them get involved with that company and say, if you don't fix your supply chain, if you don't implement whistleblower systems, if you don't do something, we're going to vote against all of you and get you all fired. That really makes them listen. So all of that is called corporate stewardship. So that's one example of something I do. I'm pretty sure I'm going on for a little bit. So the last thing I'll say is just to answer your question about the viewpoint of what it is, to go into the working world and how that's changed. It was tough because it made me realize that there's lots of different ways to try and make change, but also it just really made me sad to realize that money talks so much, and it's just sadly, it just seems to bring a new power to your voice if you can say, I have something with you. But it also made me realize that we can be a bit more clever about the way we act. So, for example, if you're a big business, you can withdraw your money. If you're a worker, I'm a big fan of the ability to strike, because that's how you as a person can say, I am no longer going to buy into this system. I'm going to withdraw my ability to work. And if you don't listen to me, well, then you've got no one to work for you. And I guess the important message is, what do young people decide is our thing to withdraw from the system around us that makes our voice really, really powerful? And it could be things like Fridays for Future, which you mentioned, the protest movement and mass mobilization. It could be all these kinds of things. But I think that's the really important message and the question that we need to answer, which is, what is going to be the thing that we can take away to really make decision makers listen? Cool. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, I tend to ask complicated questions with several sub-questions in it, but you managed that perfectly as I expected it. I'm just reading, there is a question coming in on the Slido. And it is, sorry?
It was my question.
Would you like to ask it already?
Yeah, I might as well say it. So I'm doing a bit of, one of my working with like something similar to you, and I found out that the biggest investment in fossil fuels comes from pensions. and pension fund managers using all of our pensions and choosing which one's the most profitable. And I was like, this is just doesn't make sense, since fossil fuels is not the future. In fact, there's a cut-off point to how much there is. If anything is the future, it's sustainable, renewable energy. Just wanted to know, is there anything being done now, or what's going on? What's happening in that area?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Yeah, it's a really good question. Really good. So one of probably the thing that has the most asset value, like the most cash basically in one place, is our pension funds. And the weird thing about pension funds is people work, and it's like a little drip out of your kind of cash balance, right? Like you get your pay slip, you're really happy, you have to pay bills and all of that, but people rarely notice / think about the implications of the £100, €200 that are leaving every month. Which means that it's really easy for the people who are looking after the pension funds to do whatever they want to, and to maximize their investments and put it in places that they are willing to take risks. And there is an extent that you can choose how your pension is invested. That's always the case. You can choose how risky you want your investments to be. You can choose what you're willing to invest in and what you're willing to stay out of, more importantly. But for the last forever, that's quite a late addition to the climate debate. What is the role of pension funds? But over the last couple of years, a lot of attention has come into it. So Mark Carney, for example, he used to be the governor of the Bank of England. Now he's a climate envoy for the UN. He's launched this campaign with a number of people. I always forget what the name is, but basically what they're trying to do is say pension funds are not allowed to be invested in tobacco, in weapons, in fossil fuels. That's one half, like what not to. But then the other half is what should you be investing in? And that's things like renewable energies, things like youth enterprises, things like green bonds, which is where you commit to investing your money in things that are really sustainable. So we are seeing a movement towards it that was launched a few months before COP26 even. I will try and do my research and find out the name for it and send it to you if you're interested. It's a really cool project. But I think the best solution really is, how do we make people aware that A, pensions are a thing that needs to be invested, and B, you have a lot of influence on where they can go. And you're seeing this surge of responsible investments and so on. So it is very much just an education and awareness campaign. But yeah, it's a really good question, and I'm very happy to say that it is moving in the right way. Just a long way to go.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. Sorry, Terry, do you want to jump in?
Can I super quickly just add, because you were speaking about sustainable investment, and some of you might have heard the term taxonomy. It's something, or maybe some people have not. And so taxonomy is a system that was, it's a classification system for sustainable investment that was proposed by the European Commission to define what is sustainable investment, to give a sort of system so that investors, banks, they could have a clear indication. And unfortunately, under the proposal of the European Commission, gas and also nuclear was included in potential sustainable investments. And obviously, from a green perspective, that is, excuse my French, fucking outrageous. And that is why the European Parliament started an objection procedure, because we cannot influence it. I'm not going to get into the technicalities, but the vote on this objection, whether we say that taxonomy shouldn't include things like, for example, gas and nuclear investment, will be next Wednesday. And if you still happen to know, and a member of the European Parliament, that might not be decided in this vote, it's going to be a very tight vote. We will need an absolute majority to stop it, and then please do let them know that they should vote in favor of the objection, because we want to have a definition of sustainable investment, but obviously we then want it to be sustainable investment and not investment, for example, in nuclear power or gas. Sorry for interrupting.
Is it that we're trying to time the market to the point where it's like oil is not? Are they trying to time the market essentially with fossil fuels? Is that what's going on? Like, why are they still invested in it? Is that it? Because it has no future.
So what's really sad is over the pandemic, lots of investments crashed, lots of stocks, and everything went down. The one thing that didn't go down as much was green investment. So people were like, wow, this is really good, we should invest in this. And that's why there was a surge of responsible investors, where people actively invest in ESG compliant places, so environmental, social governance. But so you answer your question, the problem is when people are scared by oil and gas and so on, they need to sell them, they need to get rid of them, they want to divest. Where does that divestment go? So that means you can sell it at really low prices because you know that no one wants them. But then you can sell them in strategic places. So we're having this weird game theory where it's like, whoever has oil at the very end is in a really bad spot. They're going to struggle. They're going to have something called stranded assets, which is something where you can't do anything with. Everyone wants to be the second to last because that's when you make the most money. And unfortunately, we're living in a world where these big managers and players, they want to make the most money and they're willing to make any sacrifices possible. So that's what it comes down to, which is how do you stay in the game as long as possible without being left with the bad card. Exactly. It's a bit like that card game where it's like catch the ace or something. So you're absolutely right. It's just the nature of the game, really. Yeah, doesn't mean we can't do anything about it, and that's why these movements are so important.
I'm going to have to draw at least a dotted line under this topic for now, because we have to move away from the world of politics, from the world of business, from the world of finance. Even though I really enjoyed this direct exchange, and I encourage everyone else to make use of that as well, and move over to the more creative side of things. I'd like to move over to Ben with the following opener, one of which was already hinted upon with you with regards to mental health. You commit yourself to several different causes, climate action, mental health, certainly a few others. Quick teaser at this note, you're going to be able to hear Ben on the podcast for a good amount of 20, 30 minutes, however long we cut it in the end, where he will speak more about his activism. Why did you become part of this podcast adventure? Why do you think that podcasts and other forms of creative media, like I was saying in the introduction to you, you're also a filmmaker and so on. Why do you think that this is the avenue to go down with regards to getting people involved? What is the, how can it serve your activism, to use that creative strand?
Thank you. Great question. So, I mean, as a storyteller, I believe that is the best vehicle that we can use to mobilize people. I think facts and data form a base infrastructure, but in the end, it's stories that put a face and personalize the situations that we're talking about. And so, like what you guys have been talking about, this is the perfect exchange here, and something that I advocate for really strongly is how do we engage conversations that bridge the gaps between people who tell stories and people who write reports, because stories put a face to what we're talking about, but in the end, for social engagement or social movement to move into, from a creative perspective, is the ultimate, which is policy and advocacy. Is you have to be able to communicate those stories in a way that can end up making sense in a report and can pass in a policy way, right? Which, to Terry's point earlier, requires a lot of compromise, right? So you creatively might come up with something that sounds amazing and will solve a lot of things, but when you get to a realistic perspective of how that becomes policy, it's almost never going to be everything you want, right? So that's where I think those conversations of bridging policy and stories together really creates great ideation and think taking and stuff. And I've come at this from working. I started out in film and TV, and worked on a lot of random stuff, Twilight movies and Real Housewives and stuff. But I quickly realized though the power of the platform that storytelling provides, whether it's movies, TV, I work in games as well. I really wanted to navigate towards amplifying people's stories that I feel are important. So I started pushing documentaries. Like one of the last ones I did was on grieving children. So we created educational material around that, which is used in countries like Denmark to teach about mental health and grief and relief. And so, I mean, that's the direction I come at it from it. And I love focusing on the climate issue because it's also, to me, those conversations are the best because people silo off their contribution and they will often only talk about one area, say carbon emissions and elements like that, and they don't realize that there are so many different tiers to elements that are a part of this. So, for example, Safe in Our World, which is the charity I work for mainly, which is mental health in games. And I've talked to major companies like TikTok and stuff who said, well, our mandate is climate. So mental health, I don't know, what can we do with that? I'm like, mental health is a massive part of the base of the climate, the climate crisis, right? This is a huge issue that should be included in it. And through that conversation, they're like, oh yeah, okay, that starts to make sense, right? But it takes a conversation to get people to start to realize that, so, yeah.
Thanks a lot. I have a quick follow-up question to that, also looking at the room, if there is any hand, which is linked to what was said in the live chat, in the Slido, revolving around the following. When politics is able to dictate certain laws and enforce certain behavior because it makes it compulsory or forbids certain behavior, where business is able to make change through money matters and is basically able to steer a lot of things. I have the feeling that the cultural side, the creative arts, come in on a much more subtle level, trying to change almost the unconscious in some way. Because, for example, a documentary about the impact of climate change on regions that are more impacted than our immediate habitat, which is often the habitat where the pollution comes from, is so moving that the person might actually stop driving their car, might take another step towards climate action. And I'd like to read this observation to a question from Anonymous in the Slido, which is, I lost it here, do you think that meat eating has to be banned to achieve the sustainable future we want, or are there ways around it? And I would first like you to respond to that from a perspective of creative campaigning, because I believe that the creative industry is a way to bridge this gap between we don't want to prohibit citizens from doing a certain thing, we don't want to come in and say you must not, you must not, you must not. And I think that the creative arts can be quite a good alleyway to that. And then I'd like a political response from you, Terry. What do you believe as a Greek politician on this question, which I'm sure you've thought about as well?
Yeah, I think right off the bat, I would say a big part of our mission is not to expect people to just quit things cold turkey. That's behavior change is very hard for anything we try and do, right? Something becoming a daily habit. So I see it as the ask of people is to curb the excess in our life, right? So if the issue is how do we stop supporting, the meat industry or illegal fishing, any of that stuff, right? How do we start divesting our time and how we support that? And that's down to giving it a shot, right? Everyone giving it a shot, even if you don't become a vegan, right? That I personally moved the fence, right? So I'll eat meat and I'll eat vegan, and my favorite restaurants are vegan, right? But that doesn't mean your lifestyle has to 100% change. But what we're asking people to do is support the transition, right? So that also means doing more homework, in what businesses, what restaurants, what food products you support. Because if anyone has also watched documentaries that I personally have been involved in on impact campaigns, a lot of regulations also don't have much oversight. So even when you buy certain products that say they're organic or say that they have gone through a process where they're promising you they're safe, it's not always true, right? So there really is an onus on people to do more homework where you can. To just stay more informed about how you're supporting stuff. But when it's through stories, to your point, the subtle aspect of it, I supported a couple of films, like one called Dark Waters, which actually had a parliament session where we showed the film, and it was about PFAS, which are forever chemicals. And through that process, just by showing a film and engaging in conversation, led to the political arena engaging on how do we pass legislation that regulates forever chemicals, right? So that subtle aspect is where we took story, but because we got it into a room where people could have real policy conversations, it actually got that far, where people at least agreed in the room to engage on policy changes for this. And we're trying to do that right now with the movie Don't Look Up, if any of you guys have seen that on Netflix, about climate frustration.
I'm sure nobody has seen that movie,
Right.
because it was a very unsuccessful.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to set up a parliament session for that film to accomplish the same thing. So there's ways we can do it that way.
Can I ask a question real quick? Do you think fiction movies can be in some ways more effective than documentaries to create a more intimate, emotional link and push for a reaction?
Yes. I do. I mean, they both have their uses, right? So to your point, I think fiction can absolutely do that, because in some ways, documentaries, for example, or news can feel a little bit in your face, like you're being told what to think because it's real, right? And when it's fiction, even if the director, right, has a vision to tell you to want to think something from their film, you can still justify in your head that it's fiction, so it's still more up to me what I decide to take from it. But when you're given a documentary or a news, that buffer is gone, right? It's not fiction, so you feel like you're being swayed more, I think. So I think it can have that power. And for a movie like Don't Look Up, as an example, I've had more people approach me about that film than any of the documentaries I've been involved in. And the project I did before that was Breaking Boundaries, which is a David Attenborough documentary, about tipping points and stuff, right? But way more people have engaged in conversation about, Don't Look Up, movies like that really make me think, like make me want to read more, make me want to engage. It is frustrating, right? So yeah, I think definitely there's a place for all of it, absolutely. Yes.
Thank you.
Just to come back to the meat question still.
Can I just super quickly reflect on this as well, because I think it's a very important point, because I sometimes as a politician have the problem when I, for example, do election campaigning, and then you address people, you talk to them, but I have the feeling that, in a direct conversation, because people tend to think, I'm a politician, so I want to convince them of something, I want to tell them what to think. And I believe that if you have films that tell stories, it is in a way much more of a like softer process, because I don't want to be in a situation where I impose something on people, but I want them to understand. And I think these kind of stories, also very often fictional stories, actually give that access, whereas in direct conversations with politicians, a lot of people just block out because they feel that you're trying to impose something on them. So I think using different tools to have access to people, also music, different forms of arts, I think it is very important also to move political issues forward. But obviously, to answer your question, and I've obviously never thought about it, because wasn't it a very big issue in a recent German election campaign that we wanted to have, I'm going to tell you, we wanted to have one day in public canteens where they would only give vegetarian food. And we had a massive counter campaign. Like, there were conservative party activists in front of our party headquarters in Berlin doing a barbecue with sausages, to show that we are free to eat sausages. And we were like, we never wanted to ban you from eating meat. We just wanted to have one vegetarian day in public canteens. That's the big Veggie Day story of the German Greens. So yes, I have thought about it. And no, I don't want to ban people from eating meat, but I want people to understand that eating meat has certain implications. And I don't only mean for the animals, but also for the climate. And very often, if you look at the meat industry, also for human beings. Because the way that people who work in the meat industry are very often treated, it is completely unacceptable. So the entry point that I would like to take is to regulate, not to prohibit, but to regulate that these kind of conditions end. And I mean that for the people, also for the animals, but also for the climate. And for that, we actually have the tools in politics. Because, for example, the European Union has a common agricultural policy where we can set criteria, or we can, make certain regulations of how animal welfare has to be safeguarded. We can make certain regulations of food quality, and so on and so on. So I think these would be the entry points that I would use. And then if there are movies that are actually highlighting, or any kind of documentaries that are highlighting the situation that we have right now with the meat industry that exists right now, I think it can help a lot to make people understand why it's not about restricting them from something that they want, but why it makes sense also in their interest not to eat a lot of cheap and badly made meat. And this is how I hope fast enough we can shift public opinion, and then we can move to a better way, in this case, of meat production and in other ways of fighting against climate change, energy production, and so on.
Thanks very much. What is coming through here, both in the creative campaigning side and also in this response, is the need for public communication and the need for education. So what I would like to maybe bring in from the floor is a question from YEM. Climate activism is often ridiculed and viewed as extremist. How do we reduce this negative perspective, and how do you think it impacts activism? And I'd like to spin that in the following way, which is that obviously climate activism, or at least climate action and the protection of the climate, is something that has reached the core of society. We've had that just at the beginning of the panel. But still, my impression is that whilst there is a lot of people interested in climate, whilst there is a lot of people aware of, it's better not to fly, and people feel ashamed for driving an SUV and stuff like that, to actually really make the change, that is sort of next level. And also when it comes to activism, for someone to actually go into the street and to stand in front of the parliament and not eat sausages, but maybe, simulate an oil catastrophe or whatever they do. That is really sort of the next step. And I wonder how we can bridge the gap through public communication, effective public communication, between that perception of the climate activist necessarily being ultra left-wing, having dreadlocks, wearing Goa trousers, and what other cliches could I bring in? Like Extinction Rebellion and binding yourself to trees. How can we bridge the gap between the little action that we need from the everyday average Joe, to actually bring society where it needs to be, and destroy this image of the extremist climate activist? And I don't know who would like to respond to that first, because it concerns everyone.
Like I've been volunteering.
Yes,
Thanks,
you
Derek.
have been volunteering.
Again, it's a really good question. I feel like there are two things that come to mind when you ask that. One is, I remember seeing a tweet actually a couple of days ago. So you know how the Supreme Court had the verdict around the EPA, and it restricted the power that the Environmental Protection Agency in the US can have to be able to regulate greenhouse gases, which is terrifying. But not just for that to happen, but the precedent it sets. But the tweet I saw was, apparently this media article came out and said, in a big blow to environmentalists, the Supreme Court rules this. And the tweet said, it's really weird that it's only a blow to environmentalists, as if they're the only people that live in the world. And it's just, I think public perception is very fickle. It's very, very scarily easy to sway. And I think one thing that we've seen throughout history is this, I don't know if it's almost like an instinct, or if it's a really clever mechanism, but it's always something to make an other, right? It's like you and the other. It's this group of people are okay, and this group of people are trying to take your rights, your opportunities, and so on. And the other can be anything, it could be the whole issue of immigration. It could be the whole issue of the refugee crisis we're seeing right now. And it's really scary how easy it is to separate yourself. I was in Kigali a couple of weeks ago in Rwanda, and we went to the memorial site where they talked about the genocide that happened. And those two tribes are identical in so many different ways, but just through subtle messaging, you've got this other. Now, the reason I bring this up is I feel like in many ways, this entire movement has been othered and has been said, these guys are trying to disrupt your life, Extinction Rebellion are really making life difficult for you. You know, they don't care about the normal person, the public interest. And when you do that, you make the movement feel inaccessible, like it's not part of you. And that's quite dangerous, because then you just get further and further away. And going back to what you said, Julius, that even people who want to be involved, who want to cut down meat, who want to stop flying. By the way, they say that the two biggest and most important things you can do as an individual is to fly as little as possible and to try and become as close to vegan as possible. And everything else is not as significant, because ultimately the biggest polluters are huge companies, oil and gas, where your pension funds are going, for example. So those two things are really, really important. So I guess what I'm saying is making being part of the movement more accessible is super important. And the way things like that will happen is, for example, how do you access vegan foods? They're really expensive right now. Like, how do we actually bridge that gap for a student who's trying to do that, but actually doesn't fit with, with their ability to do whatever they want to, and their ability to kind of meet basic needs. But also things like green transport. There are some places in the UK that have one bus every 2 hours. How, if they want to be green, if they don't want to drive, great, but there's no option to do that. So I think accessibility is a really, really important thing. The other thing I would say is, how do we balance the short-term issues that people are dealing with right now and the big long-term climate crisis, which isn't really long-term, it's happening right now, but it's how do we make sure that people are addressing the cost of living crisis happening and being able to feed their families, the economic crisis is happening, and so on, but not losing sight of I say long-term, the crisis over the horizon, because many people right now are very lucky to not be affected right now. And we're having huge floods in Bangladesh, we're having desertification in sub-Saharan Africa, but I'm from London and I haven't really seen the worst of that. I'm very lucky to do that. And until it hits, it's really, really hard to connect and resonate with something. So I guess that was my other point, which is, how do we, balance those two things of the short-term issues people are dealing with and something they're not feeling, and how do we get that feeling of I am connected to this? Yeah, pause there. Sorry, Ben. Cool.
And maybe to chip in a quick question on that note, with regards to podcasts, in your experience, given that podcasts are both creative and sort of informational, the podcast can be very campaigny and can be very, certainly used in elections campaigns, I'm not sure.
Yeah, we have a podcast actually in mind.
So given that this is sort of a tool in the middle, how can that be used to disseminate information, and how can that make people commit to steps, maybe more than a movie, or maybe less than a movie? That would be interesting to put into contrast.
Sure. I can address podcasts first. Podcasts are easy logistically to be able to launch, right? So you don't need massive resources like a movie or something like that. But I think they are a vehicle where you can engage really open-ended and candid conversation in a way other forms make it more difficult. So, for news type interviews, there's more of a strict agenda, and usually it's harder to be able to dictate what you can and can't take. But the podcast is usually you're able to be a bit more free, freewheeling in that, and the conversation can go for a long time. I personally have interviewed people myself and been interviewed, and I love the process when I'm able to be on either end of that spectrum and have a 2-hour session. Like I love it, and I've had situations where I'm the interviewer and I've had 5-hour sessions where I put someone on a hot light and a hot mic, and the goal was to break them, just shatter their heart, so that because sometimes it also takes a while to develop some trust and get people to open up, and you can't do that in 30 minutes, and sometimes you can't do that in an hour. And so podcasts sometimes can get you to that place where, maybe it takes an hour, but if you got like a 2-hour session, you can not break them like you try to destroy the person, but you're trying to break the wall, right? You're trying to break that barrier that we all have up, so that you can really get candid and get some real, deep-rooted responses and conversation. So I really love podcasts for that reason. I think it's a great place for healthy debate too, which is rare to see also in media now. We have real honest debate that's not just theater. And then to the point that was being made also about extremism and activism. I mean, I engage with Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil and movements like that. I've helped advise on things like when they do videos for, talking about the IPCC report, right? There's ways to go through, like I'll go through and provide notes and figure out how we make that feel more accessible, and easier to understand. But a lot of people, even in those movements, say, even their partners, even their best friends will say, "Oh, what you're engaging is very extreme," right? So just to your question, and my response to that is that has to do with passion, right? When people say this is extreme, what you're engaging in is extreme, and if it's really not, then what you're addressing is passion. But passion is something that's reserved for people that have, the luxury of time. And so in essence, passion is a luxury. And what we're talking about is responding to crises. And that's a very different thing. And so I think if people just halt someone who tries to say what you're talking about is extreme and get them to think about that there's a real crisis going on. And whether you feel that it's affecting your bubble, right, your local, space, maybe you don't feel that it is, but that, there's a way to relate to it when people stop coming at it directly from that this is an extreme view. And I think that also ties into, we're asking people to do a lot. You brought up great points. There's many things that we all have to worry about on our daily plate, right? Especially when economies are hard, jobs are difficult to find, or pay well, or all that stuff, right? So we're asking people to think globally and rather than provincially, and most people don't think that way, right? It's most people connect with what's in their provincial area. And so I think that's another thing too. If someone says, thinking globally, thinking about massive global issues is too much for me, that should be okay for someone to be able to say that, because there's plenty you can do, there's plenty you can help be an asset for and be valuable to your local community without having to think that I need to have an effect on other countries around the world, big global issues, right? If that feels too much for you, there's a place for everyone to engage and be valuable and contribute. Right, so I think that's something that should not scare anyone away from the conversations.
Maybe just to say, I think you should always be self-reflective about your own activism, and I've always tried to be, and I've certainly done stuff that afterwards maybe I didn't find so smart or good anymore. But at the same time, I also think activism very often is much more impactful when it is quite radical. And I want to reflect on one thing. I was at the Gay Liberation Front demonstration today. I don't know if you know, but tomorrow's London Pride, and I think it's the 50th anniversary of London Pride. And they were this group of elderly members of our community, and I don't know, I thought back, when they were standing there 50 years ago, how extreme and how, marginal and how difficult it was for them to go to the street and to do what they do. If you think about the Stonewall protest, where trans women, where sex workers, where drag queens started a protest against a brutal police force. And really thinking about that, looking back now, I think most people in this room, and I think a majority in society, thinks that it was unjust what was done to the community back in these days. People were repressed, people couldn't express themselves. Let's not speak about marriage or, things like this. So I think that when we look at what our activism should do, I think this also thinking about what do we want to achieve in the long run and what our causes are, and then judging it upon that, I think is very important. And this is why I'm also always happy when people really raise their voices in powerful ways, when they go to protest, when they do protest, and when they also show the urgency of the situation, because I think that's also what moves a societal debate forward. And I think that this has proven to be true also for the climate movement. And I can tell you that the Fridays for Future, students going on strike, what is that? I can tell you there were a lot of people who found that completely unacceptable. And at the same time, people were saying, look, we are talking about our future here, And I felt that with the pressure that was coming from this movement, we made things possible that otherwise would have never been possible. And this is what I would maybe like to be reflective about what you're doing, find the right tools, find the right ways of expressing yourself, but stay on the cause and fight for it, because I believe when we fight for issues that are important for us, we can really change the world, we can really change politics. And this is what I think we need to do in democracies. We have the privilege and the rights, and we have the possibility to do it. So I think we should grab it and make our voices heard.
And even, and even if that voice might sound extreme, that might be the boundary that we need to push. If that's what I'm taking away also. Could I ask someone in the back to switch back to the other screen again and to display the word cloud, because we have a final slido question, which is going to introduce our final question to the panel, which is, what type of activism are you most passionate about? And after some of you have responded to that, I will turn back to the panel to have one last chance of repeating to all of you, a very energetic crowd of people, that what kind of steps the panelists would recommend or ask you to take to further your cause. And I think if we manage to switch back to the web cloud, that would be great. I can already see. If you just plug out the HDMI and put it into the other one.
It has a black screen.
Sorry?
It doesn't look loud on the screen.
Ah, okay. Then I might need to change the.
I think there are no words on the screen. It's a blank one.
Okay, we're supposed to answer another question.
Was that an option?
Yeah, there's at least one more question.
Oh, what type of activism are you passionate about? Okay.
So I can see that.
Ooh, that is a good question. I can't pick one word. What type of activism?
I think I've lost the Slido.
Oh no. I can send you the link if that's helpful.
No, I wanted to take part, but if you also want to take part.
Okay, so we see a couple of different ones. We see actually different categories also. We see economic inequality and environment, because the two are inseparable. Green, which is quite obvious. Women's rights, lobbying, sexual, queer, space. Can someone explain what they mean by space? Maybe this was a type of test. I presume it's also another type of activism. Human rights, LGBTIQ is obviously linked to that. Socialism, that's a good one. Automated, what was meant by automated? Is that a contribution that anyone would like to explain? No? Okay, but we see a big one on human rights, and we see lots of things around the green space and the LGBTIQ and sexual rights. So maybe with that sort of in mind, I'd like to hand over one last time for your closing remarks, respectively. And I'd like to start with you this time and push back to Terry in this case. Feel free to use this chance as an appeal to the audience, what you would like us as members of YEM or members of this audience to do next.
Sure. I guess from what kind of activism I'm most passionate about, I would say most of this is pretty relevant to what I try and engage in. Since as a storyteller, my focus is on how to amplify people's stories. I work to amplify all of this, pretty much, right? So I try and identify people's stories that are having trouble getting out there, from underserved or unheard voices. Even at COP26, I put together 300 organizations that had stories to share and projects to amplify. And that's still an ongoing fight to get those stories to be heard. So that is definitely the direction that I come from, and I really implore you guys to activate supporting people's stories. If you feel like you have a voice, to really have something to say, there are vehicles to be able to do that. And if you know people within your circle that have a voice and they feel like, it's not being heard, I think it's really crucial to support them getting it out there, because the rooms where those stories need to be heard, they're not being heard, and they're intentionally being shown the door. So it means that more pressure, and urgency needs to be impressed upon those rooms to listen to those stories. It's why I run film festivals in like 15 countries. I've tried to do things like where we show films in different countries in different languages, and we don't ever categorize them by what's foreign or international, as a way of also kicking down that door of people thinking about an other, right, which you were addressing before, because people do that. We just had a film called Forge, which just came out, and it's in Arabic, and it's about Syrian refugees who have to use underground forgers to get proper, identity materials to be able to go to other countries. And it was rejected from being supported outside of the Middle East, because first people said no one would want to watch it if they don't speak Arabic, even though it had English subtitles. and then the UN wouldn't support it because they said they couldn't be seen to advocate for illegal activity, because using underground forgers is illegal. So these are not atypical. These are not uncommon situations at all. There are tons of these stories that need to be amplified, and there's a million excuses that people will find not to support them. So that is the perspective that I come from. I encourage you guys to, just engage conversations where you can, and watch this stuff too. Engage with these stories, and it'll help, enlighten you and encourage you to keep going. So, yeah.
In a succinct fashion, what is your appeal to us here in the room?
Yeah, I guess kind of carrying on from your point. Sorry, I'm trying to think of a really pithy way to finish it. I think first of all, there are lots of these forums where you get to input your voice and be at the table and so on, and those are really, really important. There's a lot of value with that. But something I've started to realize is when organization A or person A gives you a platform, they give it almost with a condition. They are almost setting that agenda, and you're only allowed to contribute in a particular way. And that can be quite restrictive. So for example, the work that we did at the G20, it's really powerful to project the statement and priorities of young people across those countries. But ultimately, what is the end goal? What is the real value to generate? And something that I've become, I wouldn't say cynical about, but I would say I reframe the way I see things is, instead of trying to work within the system, which there is some value, there's also a lot more value in how do you disrupt? How do you try and shake it up? And how do you try and express your message in a way that isn't necessarily laid out for you? So that's where things like protests are really, really important, because ultimately a message can only go so far if you're only allowed to say things in a certain way. So instead of wanting a seat at the table, you want to become an agenda item on that table. You want to be actively discussed for what you are doing, why you are doing it. And hopefully those sort of conversations start to bridge the gap between an extremist left-wing youth activist and actually someone who just wants to fix the world, and someone who wants to have somewhere that they can, their children can enjoy and so on. So just going to finish off with a specific semi-tangible appeal, which is please keep doing what you're doing. Please attend these events, have these conversations. And also, as you become more involved in them, see how you can facilitate other people to get involved, which is something I'm trying to do now. I was very lucky when I was 17 and 18 to have some amazing opportunities. But the reason I take things like coordinator roles, which is what Julius was mentioning at the start in the intro, is how do I enable other people to attend COP27, for example? Because COP26 was hugely unsuccessful in the way of engaging people from the Pacific, from underrepresented areas, from underserved places that you were talking about. How do you engage those in the conversation? It could be people at your school, at your university, there could be people you're working with. How do you bring them in? And that's completely up to you, but I know that is in really safe hands because you're giving up your Friday evening to be here. That's incredible commitment. And that's why I'm really, really kind of optimistic that this is going to go in the right way. That's my little pledge.
Before Terry, you can make your closing remarks. I'm also happy to announce to the panel, to the room, that YEM UK in partnership with the UK Youth Climate Coalition has been selected to host this year's edition of the Local Conference of Youth, so the local COP in the UK, which will take place this autumn. So if you'd like to get involved in that, let us know.
Congratulations.
Great.
And we hope that next year the UK is going to host the most exciting European event of the year, that is the Eurovision Song Contest. So we all have to go back to Glasgow, you guys. No, I think it's not, is it out? No, it's not out. Sorry. Okay, I didn't just say that. No, I'm going to be very short, and I'm going to say this a little bit as the granny in the room because I think I'm older than most of you. I think one thing that in my activism was very important that, or a learning experience that I had, is that it's okay to make mistakes. And I really want to tell you this, not because it's something that, older people tell you, but really because I have made mistakes. I have had very, very shitty situations. I have faced shitstorms, and also because I did things in a stupid way. And I just want to tell you, even if you feel that you have really let other people down, that maybe you have done something wrong, to keep going, because I think that this is what we need to learn in life, that even when things have gone wrong, also when maybe it was partly our fault, that we keep going. And I think especially in activism, try to also keep an eye on yourself, try to stay fine with yourself, look at how far you can go, how much you can do, because sometimes we get too caught up, we think that we have done things wrong, and then we are in this, wheel of doing things. And I think that that's very important because we want to have a sustainable future, but I think we also want to have sustainable activism for ourselves too. So be kind to yourselves, make mistakes, keep going. Thanks.
That's a very lovely note to end on. On that note, I know, Terry, you've got to dash off. Is Sophie or Michael able to bring me the orange bag?
No.
We're going to play Santa Claus for a moment. We can maybe also take a quick group picture with this panel here. The orange bag in the other room.
I'll go and have a look.
Thank you. And in the meantime, we will set up the screen to show the other page again with the podcast, because next up is wonderful. Thank you so much. Excellent. Yeah, as I said, Santa Claus in the UK looks like this. It's my real pleasure to have hosted this panel, to have had you here, all of you. I will just basically let you fight who gets which flavor. We've got the green one here, which is the mint. We've got caramel with a touch of salt. Or we've got orange apples. So
thank you so much.
You have your pick. I will just everyone.
God, sorry, you're leaving today. You
Which one do you
Oh, I like these.
Yeah, you do.
Are we going to fight to be the most?
Chocolate?